Bob Withrow here, my neighbor. He was alive during World War II. This is the man I'm interviewing for my history class. Mr. Withrow, what were you and what were your duties and why were you involved in the war?
Well, I was drafted. I was in college in 1942, and I was drafted the first part of 1943 to go in the service. And I chose the U.S. Coast Guard as the branch that I wanted to go into. And they eventually took me into the Coast Guard in May of 1943. And
okay.
How much you want to elaborate on that? I mean,
This
is
is
there
much
more questions on it?
Were you happy about the draft, or were you upset that you were going to have to go in the Coast Guard?
No, I wasn't upset. I was, I know I was going to have to go into the service. I was, at the time, I was, had just turned 18, and all able-bodied men had to go. They either volunteered or they were drafted. The reason I was drafted, I was in college, and they kept me out for 1 year because I was in college. But I wasn't sorry I had to go in, no.
What were your duties in the Coast Guard during World War II?
My duties after boot camp, which I attended boot camp in Brooklyn, New York, Manhattan Beach. After boot camp, I was sent to a base over in New Jersey. After 3 months there, while I was at the base in New Jersey, I worked in our little base hospital. And I liked that type of work. So one of the doctors in this little hospital asked me if I would like to go to school. Pharmacists made school, and I told him yes. So he made arrangements for me to go to pharmacist made school in Groton, Connecticut. And after I finished the 3, maybe 4 months in Groton, I was then assigned to a ship, which was the USS Durant. It was a destroyer escort. And at that particular time, the destroyer escorts were escorting convoys from this country to Europe, North Africa, Italy, southern France, and so forth. I was a pharmacist mate aboard the destroyer escort, which was a small vessel. We had 215 men, but we kept about 6 or 8 destroyer escorts with a convoy going across to protect them from submarine and airstrikes, from German airstrikes. As a pharmacist mate, I enjoyed the work. I, of course, had to take care of a lot of problems that the men had. There were only 2 of us aboard ship, and we were the doctors per se. But we had larger vessels. We had some destroyers in our convoy that had a hospital aboard and also had medical doctors. So if we had a case or something we couldn't handle aboard my ship, we would radio the other ships. They would come alongside. We would transfer our patient from my ship to their hospital aboard the destroyer.
After, while on the ship in the sea, when you landed on land, what were your duties there?
We didn't stay any particular, didn't stay very long on land because our job, as I say, was transporting troops and things pertaining to war, machinery, mechanized machinery, and so forth, across. We would go in, and it took us about between 19 and 21 days to cross the ocean. And the ports we would hit, we would just go in and stay maybe 10 days to repair ships if we had anything to repair, and to restock the ships with necessary foods for a return trip. So I didn't have any time, and there wasn't any. I wasn't in any area where there were troops fighting or anything. All of my convoy duty went to North Africa, in and around Casablanca and Oran, Algiers, And at that time, the Germans had been run out of North Africa by the British and the Americans, so there wasn't any hostility in those ports, except some of the natives were still hostile. But we would stay in these ports approximately 10 days, back aboard ship, go back to the States, refuel, refix the ship again, and then make another trip. I think all in all, I made 5 or maybe 6 trips over and back. I'm not sure.
What were your duties and what actions did you take when you were at boot camp in your first years of the war right after the draft?
When I arrived at Manhattan Beach, New York, I was assigned to a company, as all boots are. But boot camp in the Coast Guard was very similar to the Army, Navy, Marines, anything else, in that we had a lot of marching and a lot of drilling on the drill field, except that we didn't go into the shooting end of it too much. That's why these pistol, rifle, and so forth. I didn't have to do that. I had to do the drills, but not the firing range and so forth. But while I was in boot camp, along with other duties I had in my barracks to sweep and clean, we had to go to the gym, which was a large training building there. And at that time, Jack Dempsey, former heavyweight champion of the world, was in charge of the gymnasium and the physical training for the Coast Guard at Manhattan Beach. And Jack, of course, being heavyweight champion of the world at one time, had a lot of boxing friends, and he brought them in. At the time I was there, we had 2 or 3 boxing champions there, Lou Ambers, Lou Jenkins, or 2 that I can think of. But anyhow, I was interested in boxing and was picked out of my company as being one of the better boxers, so I was placed on the boxing team along with the members of the other companies at Manhattan Beach. But I spent a lot of time there doing helping in the gym, and we fought other companies and other other training groups that would come in from other camps. So that was what I did for the 3 months in boot camp, and then I, of course, left there and went to pharmacist med school after a short stay in New Jersey.
Did you enjoy boot camp more than or was it like a duty, or was it like more an enjoyment?
It wasn't too enjoyable. I mean, when you look back on it, I was, as I say, 18 years old, and I had to do all these silly things that they make you do, and apparently they didn't think they were silly. I mean, like getting up at 3:30 in the morning and your skivvies and going out and running around the field 6 or 7 times, and then, things like that appeared, they were stupid, and we had a bunch of young guys that were given petty officer rates, 3rd, 2nd class petty officers that didn't know much more than I did about the service, except that they had been at sea, living on the coast, and they knew how to handle small boats, and their families up on all along the New England coast, from Cape Cod, from Massachusetts on down, were in boating, and they, of course, made them petty officers to teach us country boys how to sail a boat and how to handle a small craft. Of course, they didn't tell us anything about the duty aboard ship, but the small craft we learned from them. And they tended to be real sarcastic when they didn't have to be, but that's part of being in boot camp. That was probably the same in Army, Navy, and Marines, all the way down.
What did you do after the war was over and your duties were over? Where did you go?
Well, when the war ended, I was still in service. I was, in fact, when the war in Europe ended, I believe it was May of '45. No, it wasn't then. It was before that. Anyhow, when the war ended in Europe, I was at sea, but we came in from my last trip across. I went into New York City and was transferred from there to Portland, Maine, yes. And I worked up in Portland, Maine on a buoy tender for a while, and then from Portland, Maine, we took a buoy tender from Portland, Maine, down to Brownsville, Texas, so it could be used in that area. When we got to Texas, I was transferred off of the buoy tender and sent to New Orleans, where I worked in what they call a separation center. Being a pharmacist mate, I worked with a group of other pharmacist mates and doctors to process Coast Guardsmen coming in there, process them out of the service. They had to have routine physicals, and all the paperwork had to be taken care of to make sure they were in good health when we discharged them from New Orleans. And I was also discharged there myself in New Orleans. They gave me a ticket back to West Virginia, a train ticket, and a few dollars, and said adios. They offered us pharmacist mates a deal. If we would stay in the service another 3 years, they would give us another rank, promote us, and so forth. Which, retrospect and looking back, I should have taken that and stayed in the service for a while. But at that particular time, I wanted to get out, and I told them no. So I went back to West Virginia and had various odd jobs from there. I tried selling insurance. I worked as a helper to a brick mason, and I finally wound up, I went to a radio station, applied for a job because I had a little college. They thought maybe I could handle a continuity writer's job, which I tried, and I did all right. And that's, by the way, where I met my wife. She was secretary in this radio station, and we were married a year or so later. And I worked as a practical nurse for a while due to my training in the Coast Guard. I took care of sick people that did not have to be hospitalized, but stayed in their home with them, and just following doctor's orders, giving shots, baths, and shaves, and so forth. Did that for a while. Then I opened up a floral shop, and I was a florist for a while, a year or so, 2 years maybe. And then I made application to the U.S. government for a job as a prison guard with the Bureau of Prisons. I received a letter back from them shortly after made the application, said that I had been selected if I could report to Alcatraz off the coast of California in 30 days. Well, I didn't particularly want to go to Alcatraz. I knew some people that had worked there, and they told me how it wasn't easy working there because of you had to live in San Francisco and ride the boat back and forth each day, which is a 40 to 45 minute trip each way. And there wasn't enough housing on the island for all the officers. So I talked myself out of that, wrote back to Washington, told them I was still interested, but I did not want the Alcatraz job. A month later, I got another letter and wanted to know if I could report to Atlanta, Georgia, to the federal penitentiary, and to start a training class there. And I accepted that job. That's how I came to Georgia in 1951, and I've been here ever since. I retired from the penitentiary. After I retired from the penitentiary in 1970, I went to work for J.C. Penney as a security manager, and I worked there 14 years. Retired from that job in 1986.
Looking back, did you enjoy working for the Coast Guard during World War II?
Yes, I really did. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of factors involved, but the main reason was it was a small branch of the service. And every station I went to, I was stationed in several small stations up and down the East Coast as well as New Orleans. There was never a large group of people. You didn't have to line up to do this. You didn't line up to do that. When you went to chow, you just casually strolled in. There wasn't any lines to get in. And aboard ship, as I said, we had 215 men. That was all we had. And it's just a small outfit as opposed to a large group of sailors on a battleship or an aircraft carrier, or the Marines and the Army. It was just, they were large groups, and it was hard to You had to line up to do everything. You didn't do that in the Coast Guard.
Is there anything you'd like to add about what you did during the war?
Well, there's something I like to add, Doug. It wasn't during the war. It was after the war. After I'd reported to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. I'd been there about 4 years. And one day they had a notice on the bulletin board asking for volunteers to go to Berlin, Germany to work in Spandau Prison. Spandau Prison was where they sent the Nazi war criminals after they were tried in Nuremberg, Germany in 1948, 46 and 48. After the trials, they sent 7 of them up to Spandau Prison. There were 22 men tried. They executed 11 and sent 7 to Spandau, and the rest were released, pardoned. But anyhow, this notice on the bulletin board, I applied for the thing, having really no idea what Spandau Prison was at the time. But after a few weeks, they called me to the warden's office and said I had been chosen, one of 4 men chosen throughout the Bureau of Prisons. The other 3 that went over with me there was one from Alcatraz, one from Leavenworth, Kansas, and one from Englewood, Colorado prison. So the 4 of us went over there in May of 1955 after a month's training in Washington, D.C., and we took our families along. We went over on the SS United States, which was quite an experience for me. After being on a destroyer escort during the war, this ship could have taken about 10 destroyer escorts inside it. But anyhow, we arrived in Berlin, and after indoctrination and so forth, I started to work at Spandau Prison, which is in the British sector of Berlin, Germany. We lived in the American sector. And the people that we were guarding, there were only 7, as I said, 7 men sent to Spandau. About a month before I got there, they released Baron von Neurath, who was similar to our Secretary of State in Hitler's cabinet. He traveled around and made decisions for Hitler and so forth with other governments. But he was discharged before I got there. The remaining men that were there was Albert Speer, who was in charge of all Hitler's war production. Everything pertaining to the war, he was in charge of seeing that it was produced and put into operation. And Speer was also Hitler's private architect. He did many structures in Berlin and had plans for many more had Germany won the war. I also had Rudolf Hess, who was Hitler's right-hand man and was second in command during the war, second in command along with Hitler. Hess was also the last man in the prison. He was there probably 6 or 7 years by himself after the rest either died or were discharged. Albert Speer, the man I just mentioned, received a 20-year sentence, and he was released in 1956, I believe. He did the 20 years, did it all. There was no good time for these men. They had to do the entire sentence. But Speer was released, and he went back to his home in Nuremberg, Germany, where he wrote 3 books, and they were about the World War II, and also one book about the prison that he was in. I have all 3 of those books. Rudolf Hess, as I said, was the last man to leave the prison. He was in his 80s, I think 87 probably. He died in prison in Spandau about 5 years ago, but probably been in the late 80s, 89 probably, 88 or 89. The other men in there were Admiral Karl Donitz, who was in charge of the submarine warfare,
along with the rest of the German Navy. And Admiral Raeder was in command before Dönitz took over, but Raeder did serve in Hitler's cabinet after Dönitz took over the submarines. And we had Walter Funk, who was in charge of all the monies that Hitler used to wage war. I mean, he was in charge of all the banks in Germany. In fact, he was one of the things that were held against him at the Nuremberg trials was that he took all of the dead and war criminals that Hitler had in slave labor when they died or were executed in the gas chamber. Walter Funk's men removed all the gold teeth from these people, and they opened up one of his banks after the war and found a vault completely full of gold teeth from people that had been killed by the Germans. Another of the men who were there was Baron von Schirach. He was the youngest of the bunch, and just before World War II, Hitler had chose von Schirach to be in charge of the German youth, and he is the man that trained and taught war maneuvers and war propaganda to all the young German children, girls and boys. The other, that's six, I think. Speer, Hess, Dönitz, Raeder, Funk, von Schirach. That was the 6 men that I actually guarded. I stayed there 3 years, and the way the prison was operated, it was a 4-power operation. After the war, of course, Berlin was divided. The city of Berlin was divided into 4 sectors: British, French, Russian, and American. And those 4 powers operated this prison. That was set up in the treaty signed by all 4 after the war. And the way it operated, a prison guard like myself was assigned to a country. Each time that country had duty at the prison, I had to work with it. And it so happened that when I started, I was assigned to the Russians. So every time the Russian captains and lieutenants were in charge of the prison, I had to be there as the American representative, along with someone from France, Great Britain, and Russia. So that's the way the prison operated. And that each country was in charge of feeding the prisoners and medical attention to the prisoners for 1 month. Every 30 days we changed guards. If the Americans had it 30 days, the British would come in and take 30 days, and then the French, and then the Russians. And that went on for all the 3 years I was there. It was a very good experience for me because I got to see quite a bit of that part of Germany. I didn't do much traveling. We went to a couple cities outside of Berlin, but it was an experience just to be in Berlin and go behind the Iron Curtain over in the Russian sector of Berlin. I left there in 58. I was there just about 3 years, and we were relieved by 4 more American prison guards. They relieved us. We came back to the States and went back to our various jobs. And I might add that before we went to Germany, we had to resign from the Bureau of Prisons, and be sworn in by the State Department, because the State Department was in charge of the Spandau Prison. After I came back to the States, I had to resign from the State Department and be sworn in the Bureau of Prisons again. That's about all I can remember that probably should have been added. And there's a lot more to be said about this whole operation, which is a whole separate tape. But it's interesting. Some people that are interested in World War II find this an interesting thing. And as I said, there's a lot can be said and written about the war criminals that were sent to Spandau after the Nuremberg trials. So that about does it, Doug, for that. Anything else I can help you with, let me know.
That's all right. I want to thank you for letting me hold this interview with you, Mr. Withrow.
All righty. Run it back and see what came back.